Cool. All right, I guess we'll start with introductions. My name is Luke Teeters. I come all the way from Cleveland, Ohio in the US. The first thing I'm going to ask is how many people in the room actually have traps currently? Cool. Have you guys implemented it all? Are you guys pushing it out or getting ready? There you go. Cool. All right, so really, Palo Alto Networks asked me to come out and talk to you guys about my experience deploying traps in our organization. I work for Materion Corporation. We're an advanced materials company. We manufacture alloys, metals for various industries like medical, aerospace, automotive, defense. We're a very large corporation. We've been around for around 100 years. And Materion spun out in 2012 from various acquisitions. So we are a very diverse company, having our foot in many industries. A little bit about myself. I'm actually recently graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Networking from the University of Akron. That's where LeBron James is from. Little clicker there. I previously worked for a startup company at the Cleveland Clinic, a big data health company, and IBM actually acquired that company. So I worked for IBM for a little bit, and then I was given an opportunity by a professor to actually go work for Materion, and I took it because it was security, which is where I wanted to go. Got a couple certs. I'm actually the chapter leader for our local fuel user group in Cleveland. We have a lot of companies come out. You know, we have really good discussions. So if you guys have a local fuel group or not, I would definitely look into that. It's really beneficial to you to go to those meetings and see what's coming. And actually, they bring in some really good speakers from Microsoft and other large companies that talk about their integration with Palo Alto. So again, I am a network engineer at heart, turned to security. And when I started at Materion, they have already purchased traps. Luckily, my boss knows what he's doing, and he actually went ahead and got that. And when I started, that was one of my first projects to deploy it. So I actually attended Ignite last year. How many people attended Vegas last year? Just a few of you, great. So last year, I was in Las Vegas, fairly new to Palo Alto Networks, and I saw this platform, and it just really clicked to me. I'm an infrastructure guy. I really like the network and the systems and just how it all ties together. And really, if you really break it down to its simplest form, this is really the attack surface of your company. You have your cloud, you have your perimeter at your firewall, and then you have your endpoint. Typically, you buy products from various vendors, and Palo Alto Networks actually has an overall vision to actually tie it all together. Services such as Wildfire, which we all have come to love. I went to a few presentations on that today, and just really cool stuff that they're doing. And the fact that it's integrated with your endpoint, your perimeter, and your cloud environment, it's really great. So if you guys haven't looked into how this all ties together, I would definitely recommend going to their website and reading about it. I just figured I'd throw that in there. All right, so the agenda today is traps overview. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about traps, how it works. It's a very difficult thing to wrap your mind around if you're kind of comparing it to the traditional antivirus. That's why my talk is how we are securing our endpoints without antivirus. It's really a whole different concept, a whole different way of approaching the issue. We'll go through my experience around 2,500 endpoints. Obviously, there was a project scope to this. Considerations, we had a current vendor that was already in place, traditional antivirus. And then lessons learned. After we pushed it out, what would we recommend to you guys whenever you guys deploy this to your organization? After that, we'll go through the ongoing maintenance and operations of traps. How do I run it? I deployed it, it's out there, now what? And then also upgrading future releases. I know they just released 4.0. I think they're up to 4.0.1 currently. What features were introduced? I'm actually currently running 3.4, and I'm preparing to get to 4.0 as soon as they get back from Ignite, actually. We actually don't. Actually, funny story, back to the startup company, I was actually a Mac administrator for that company, and I automated myself out of a job completely using open source tools and scripting, and ended up getting into the network side, and that's how I ended up in security. So it was a really, I really like Mac. So if you guys want to talk about Mac, we can talk about it after the talk. Okay, so really traps, if you break it down into two parts, this is as simple as I could possibly explain it. You have your malware protection and your exploit protection, and those are two separate animals. Two separate ways, and they always talk about the multi-method approach, and this is really the simplest way I can break it down. We just discussed wildfire. So the fact that you have your wildfire known malicious executables being blocked on the endpoint is great. Why is that great? Well, if you have SSL at all in your company and you're not decrypting it, someone can go out to a website, download an executable. If it's in an SSL tunnel, not decrypted, the firewall won't see it, and now it's on your endpoint. And now they open up that file. If it's malicious, the fact that Wildfire's logic and verdicts are all there at the endpoint is really great. It's just another layer in the multi-method approach and just the infrastructure in general. But what about for files that haven't been seen or analyzed by Wildfire? You actually have the local static analysis. So what that does is they've worked very hard on getting these Wildfire verdicts to come down very quickly, and I think they're down to 5 minutes. But what about within the 5 minutes? I sat in a talk with Unit 42 earlier today, and they talked about it was Shenmue, some kind of variant that it would literally destroy the machine within about 30 to 90 seconds. It would literally wipe the master boot record, the machine's done. So the local static analysis, they actually said caught that. So what that means is when you open up an executable and there is no known hash, it's unknown, you could actually tell traps to run a local analysis against that. If it is deemed malicious, you can actually block it while it's going up to Wildfire to get the dynamic analysis. The next part is evaluation of trusted signers. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. So when you write code, you can actually sign it. So when Microsoft releases Office, when Adobe Reader comes out, it's all signed. It's legit. You can actually go to VeriSign, GoDaddy, buy cert, sign your code. You could actually tell traps, well, if it's not signed, I don't want it to run. So the multi-layer approach is real. Like there's so many different things that you can put into place to stop things from happening. The policy-based restrictions, this is, okay, the classic drive, I get to work, I see a USB drive in the parking lot, I pick it up, I bring it into the office, plug it in. Traps can actually stop executables from running from certain directories, USB drives, CDs. But let's say you have something like IronKey, there's an executable on that in order for it to decrypt. You can actually whitelist IronKey.exe and it runs. So there are whitelists in that sense, but it's just a lot different of a mindset here. The malware protection modules, that's the logic of threat injections and stuff like that. And then over on the exploit prevention, this is a whole other side of the house. So an example here, let's say you fire up Adobe Reader.exe, the executable. That's a trusted, signed, legit, benign, it's going to run. But what about the PDF that it's opening, right? Let's say that PDF has some exploit in it. Let's say as soon as it's opened, it's doing something interesting that it shouldn't do. What Traps does is it injects itself into the actual running process. It sees something bad and it kills the process, so it actually doesn't compromise the host. So it's all about preventing the host from ever getting infected. There is no after-the-fact scan. So really, I don't see a scan button here. This is active defense. It's sitting there watching executables, watching processes, and it's a really great way of protecting the endpoint from ever even getting compromised. So I got this straight out of the admin guide. I recommend you guys read it. If you went out and bought Traps and you're actually planning on deploying it, definitely go into the admin guide and just diligently read it. I spent a few hours going through it, and it just really made sense. A lot of questions I had were answered in there. So this is straight from the admin guide, what we just discussed. The malware protection is executable files, right, .exes. The hash is checked against Wildfire. A local analysis can be triggered. The trusted signers, all those things. So later in the presentation, we'll kind of go with the dashboard a little bit, but it's very similar to your firewalls. You have your policies. You go to your policies tabs, and then you have your malware protection and your exploit prevention. This is where you set that up. So really, there's a whole flow of how this works. And as I said earlier, the fact that Wildfire is at the endpoint, literally on the endpoint, it's a really great thing to have it there, because we all love it on the firewalls, but if it gets onto the endpoint somehow, the user takes the machine home. Let's say they don't connect to VPN, they go to sourceforge.com, download their own software, and it completely bypassed your firewall. Well, if Traps is on the endpoint, then you'll get your local analysis. if your ESM server, which we'll talk about later, is in your DMZ, it could actually check in and get it up to wildfire. The next part is the exploit protection. This is a nice little diagram as well in the admin guide. Notice non-executable file. So this is a PDF, docx. It's something that's not. It's creating a process, and Traps injects itself into the process and says this process should act in this way. And if it starts to deviate from that, heap spray, JIT mitigation, all these crazy things. I was told that there are only 25 odd ways of compromising a Windows host. They have to do it in such a way that is, memory corruption, heap over, there's only so many ways to compromise a host. So the fact that Traps injects itself in the process and says, hey, that doesn't look right, and kills it, it's a really great thing. It always gets smarter. They always improve on that. And processes, every update, the list gets larger and larger. So obviously your popular Adobe Reader and Office and all that stuff is there. All right, so on to my experience. So we have 30 plus worldwide locations. We're in Europe, we're in Asia, North America, we're all over the place. We have around 2,500 endpoints, a little over 250 servers, and we had a traditional antivirus already in place. And it really wasn't doing much, I'll tell you that right now. When I started, I was looking at the dashboard of that solution, and it really wasn't stopping. It wasn't doing much of anything. It was a pain for the server guys to keep the signatures up to date, a lot of bandwidth to push down those signature updates. When machines left the network, they were completely just unprotected with the updates. The last piece of this is we can't disrupt production. We can't push Traps out to a site and have it just go trigger happy and start taking machines off the network. We need to keep making money as a company, continue operations as normal. So this is the general infrastructure overview of how Traps is set up. This is one way of setting it up. This is very similar to how we set it up. So essentially you have a server, the ESM console, and that's where all your policies reside. So I guess you can kind of compare it to a panorama type of deal where you actually put your policies, and that's where the machines actually check in. It's very advisable to have your SQL database that all that data is stored into external on an actual SQL server, so you have a dedicated database. It's also great for backing it up. And then you also have your ESM servers, and those are the actual IIS servers, the web console, log in, create your policies, check the logs, forward your logs, forensic folders get uploaded there, your licenses, stuff like that. So it's really a very simple infrastructure setup, and what happens is those servers actually tie into Wildfire. So what happens is if a machine executes a file, it uploads that file to your ESM server. Your ESM server gets it up to Wildfire. So your ESM server essentially has like a cache of known hashes already. So it's a very quick process, and if it's unknown, there's options. You could either do the local analysis. You could say I don't want unknowns to run. So you do have options there. And then the forensic folder is if something ever did happen and you needed to do a forensic analysis on an investigation of some sort, you could actually dump the forensic data and actually do forensics on the incident. So, and then obviously you have your Traps agents, and that's just software installed on the endpoint. It works on various platforms, servers, stuff like that. And pretty much infrastructure-wise, this is a very high level of how it's all set up. So 2 servers, a database, Traps agents, and you're good. So the considerations is, like I mentioned, you would want to create a SQL database externally to back up. If your servers ever crash, you could always just point back to your database. You're good there. We set up just a 2012 box, installed server and console on it. You can separate that out if you want. You could have multiple ESM consoles spread out throughout your network. If you guys have a large enterprise that has multiple data centers, that's doable. And what we actually did was we took the Traps MSI installer and we customized it. We opened it up with an editor. We baked in our URL. We baked in the port. And we actually pushed it out with group policy. You guys can do it with your tool, SCCM, whatever deployment tool that you would have available to you. And we literally did it silent install during logon, and it worked really great. The other thing to take into consideration is the way that the Traps endpoint connects to the server is SSL. So you could either go out and buy an SSL certificate from your GoDaddy, VeriSign CA, or if you have an internal CA, you can actually just create your own SSL certificate that the machines trust. So essentially, that's pretty much it. I mean, those are the different pieces that you would need to set up before you would deploy. So the endpoint server, this is where everything is sent to, right? So you can actually put this in your DMZ if you don't VPN in at all times. So let's say a machine's taken home and they download a file from SourceForge, not behind your firewall. They go to launch it. The hash is sent up to your ESM server over SSL, unknown, fires it up to Wildfire, and that's essentially how it works. Also, the verdicts are cached on the endpoint as well as the server, so it's very fast. If another machine saw it, they might already have a verdict for it. You could also retrieve the status of the agent from the server. You go to the server, you trigger that. The next time it checks into that server, it can pull the forensic folder. And then also the reports and everything else. So pretty much all communication between your endpoint client to the server is handled by the ESM server. The console, this is just your typical web interface, IIS server. You could have it separate, and you essentially just manage your policies there. You could check your events, you could check your logs, and that's where you configure your policy rules. And this is actually what it looks like. So typically, day-to-day operations, I'll go into the office, I'll fire this up. You could actually see what machines have checked in, what machines are on, what have shut down, disconnected from the network. You see what versions of traps in the center there, what version you're running that it's reporting in, and then your license count on the right there. They've updated this console a few different times, and I'm sure over time it's just going to get better and better. I'm assuming Panorama looks really great. I'm sure as time goes on, it'll look better and better, but the current state is great. You just log in, you can see at a high level where you're at, what machines are physically checking in. The most targeted application, most targeted machines. It's just a really great overview. And you could actually forward the logs from this server to a SIM platform. So that's actually a really good thing. So standard syslog format. So again, back to that policy tab. So this is where you would configure the malware protection that was mentioned earlier. Those are the executable files. So like a standard would be you would go in there, you'd say, all right, anything that's classified as malicious and Wildfire, I want it not to run. You can actually quarantine the file. So they go to SourceForge, download the file, they double click on it. It actually quarantines the file. So it actually is no longer accessible by the user. I had a lot of pushback from server guys with the traditional antivirus mindset saying, well, it wasn't deleting the file. It's still on the desktop, but traps won't let it run, but it's still there. This is a new feature they added, I want to say 3.3.3.4, the quarantine option. So it's another way of getting that file away from the user to actually try to launch again. The exploit prevention, these are the non-executable files. This is the process protection that it injects itself into. There's a whole series of default rules included, and we'll talk about actually updating that on operations. So the restrictions, this is the folders, external media. They also have a child process and unsigned processes as well that I mentioned earlier. And what that would be is if a process spawns another process and it actually sees that and says, that doesn't look right, it can actually kill it off. And I want to say, I sat in a traps talk earlier this week about 4.0 actually looks at, okay, if it's a legitimate process like PowerShell, the user opened PowerShell, that's okay, but what if Word opened PowerShell? Is that okay? Probably not. Probably they opened up the Word document, there's some macro that kicked off PowerShell and did something bad. So there's a lot of, the multi-method approach is just really great. The local analysis, the verdicts, there's actually a grayware verdict. So an example there would be the Axe toolbar. It's considered grayware. So as soon as I turned on grayware and set it to quarantine, everyone's Axe toolbar was removed from the entire company. It cleaned up a lot of garbage. So if there's trash software already on the endpoint and you push traps out, you can actually turn on grayware and quarantine it. The next time it launches, it'll yank it off the system. So a really nice feature. And then the agent settings. So here's a kind of a lesson learned in a way. The heartbeat. we had so many machines checking in so often, we had to kind of tweak that. It's a lot of SSL traffic as well, so you'd have to plan that accordingly. But essentially, the heartbeat is, hey, every time I check in, hey, I'm still on, this is my version, this is what state I'm in. And if anything occurs, it will connect to actually upload the file to Wildfire. And then actions, this is your typical users. You can integrate this with LDAP, so you can actually have users and groups. Your IT service desk can log in and take a look at it. Your administrators can go in there and actually make changes. And that's where you do your licensing. You can push out updates to the Traps clients themselves through this console. And so when I first started using Traps, the policy tab just really confused me. And after using it over time, it just made sense. So I would definitely recommend reading the admin guide and maybe talking to your local sales rep about getting one-on-one with a sales engineer to actually go through that. So some lessons learned. There's default policies that come with Traps. So after you push it out, I highly recommend leaving the default policies, and you can customize after that. During the proof of concept, what you can do is there's an action. So if it sees something, it can either alert you or it can stop, prevent is what it's called. So what I would highly recommend is when you push it out, you can actually put it into a notification mode, and you're fine. It's not doing anything. It's literally notifying you. And you would then check your console server to see what is actually happening. What would it have blocked? And then when you're actually in production, setting it to prevention is recommended. That way it's actually, when it sees something bad, it actually kills it off. You can actually customize the notifications. So whenever something happens, you could actually pop up a little message saying, call the service desk. You could actually include HTML in there, a link to your service desk portal page, a phone number, your own. We have our own custom security branding for our company. So when a user sees that security branding, they understand that it was from corporate IT and not from, warning banner, your machines have been infected. They recognize that corporate branding. So you could actually corporate brand this as well. Not just the Traps icon, you could literally put your icon, corporate security. And then like I mentioned a minute ago, you can actually forward to a SIM. So if you guys already have a SIM or have a SOC or something like that, you could forward in your favorite format to those guys, and then they can correlate the event as well. So ongoing maintenance. So day-to-day operations, right? So you're in the office, you get a ticket, and someone says, hey, this process isn't running, or hey, I can't launch this executable. How does that work? It's very simple to go in your alerts pane and actually see what's happening, and you can actually whitelist it directly from there. You could actually manually override a wildfire verdict inside the server. So whenever the next time it checks in, it's then considered to be benign while wildfire does its thing. And if wildfire comes back and says it's still malicious, but it really isn't, you can actually challenge the verdict directly from the Traps portal. So you don't even have to go to the Palo Alto website, type everything, upload stuff. You can literally click a button, type in your justification, and you can actually fire it off that way. The hash control is where you would do your local override. And so as far as like, oh no, it stopped something from running, you can actually just quickly go into the server, see what happened, whitelist it if you want to think of it that way, and next time it checks in, it will run. A lot of success there, no major problems. I had it running next to a traditional antivirus, no problem at all. Now, upgrading in future releases. So when Traps gets a new upgrade, you can actually go into your server, upload the installer to the server, and next time your machines check in, they'll actually grab it and update themselves. It's really great. The other thing that they started doing is content updates. You actually don't have to update the Traps client to get content updates. You can actually go grab the content update from the dynamic updates portal on the Palo Alto website, sneak it in the server, and the next time the client checks in, it grabs a new content update. So what that does is it increases your protected processes, the default settings that we talked about a minute ago that you would want to leave on, those get updated. So like compatibility stuff, so if they discover an issue that it's killing something off, these content updates would then correct that. So 4.0, as I mentioned, I'm not running 4.0 yet, but there's some new highlighted features that I thought were cool. The Microsoft Office macros. So we all hear about these macros that a user opens a document. It says, hey, you must enable macros to view this, or this was created with the previous version of Office. Click here to continue. They click it, and then they get hosed. So this actually takes a look at those macros as well and does the same type of exploit prevention that it does on other processes. Exploit fingerprinting protection. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of this, know about this. Very interesting technology. Essentially, your machine has a fingerprint. They try to determine what OS you're running, what patch you're running, what type of Adobe Reader or Flash or whatever they can understand about your machine, and then target a malware to your machine knowing that it's going to work. They don't just spray and pray. They actually target based on what they're seeing from your fingerprint. This is very similar to how ad agencies track you on the internet. You go to the website, your machine's unique to them. They understand who you are. You log in, now they know who you are, and they track you through other sites. That's why you always see the weird ads on Amazon and then on Facebook. It's a new technology, and they're using it to deliver targeted malware to machines. It's really interesting. And the fact that they're actually going to protect that is really great, because I don't know about you guys, but IE Edge, we're a Microsoft shop. You're going to have it out there, and that's a very effective way of delivering malware specifically to your users. The kernel privilege escalation protection was really great. They talked about that in a different session. Really technical stuff, but essentially it looks at it from a kernel level, so it's not just processes and executables anymore. And then the new Panorama update, the 8.0. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the correlation events in PanOS, but you can actually forward your traps logs to Panorama, and you can actually correlate events. So that's really cool, and they actually just did a session on automating that. Tagging it, putting it into a quarantine zone, and kicking the machine off the network. Really cool stuff. So they're really working towards integrating traps into PanOS and making it very simple to use. And then also the Mac support, kind of mentioned a minute ago, which was really great. Because Mac obviously is getting larger and larger in the enterprise. A lot of startup companies are running Mac, and there's really not much support for Mac. So the fact that they're doing that, I'm assuming Palo Alto Networks is probably running Mac. So they probably wanted something for their Macs. That's probably the driving factor there. So I want to say questions. How much time do I have left? I think we have some time, about 10 minutes or so. So does anyone have any questions on deploying traps to your enterprise? Because what I'm finding is a lot of people buy it, they deploy it out, and then they don't really understand the process of correcting issues if they come up. So this is the time. Yeah?
So you left the legacy antivirus on your system? Did you end up removing that?
We removed it, actually. So what happened was...
Can you repeat it?
Okay, so the question was, did we remove the traditional antivirus after we deploy traps? And the answer to that is yes. We removed the traditional, and we are 100% traps. The traditional antivirus, it's a funny story. When we started removing it with the other product, we started getting a lot of calls from the service desk saying, hey, my computer's faster. What happened? Did the network, you guys increase anything? No, we just uninstalled, I'm not going to name names, the old product. And we actually did it to a sysadmin guy as well, like some guy who's been in the field for 20 years, and he actually commented, my machine's been running a lot faster. And he said, oh, that's because you're on the list, and we removed it off your machine. So, we definitely are only running traps. And we are full production. So in the course description here, I said minimal staff. It's me running it, and I'm standing in front of you guys. I'm in Vancouver. So I feel really confident. I feel really good about it. The whole crypto locker thing that came out, unfortunately, that kind of stuff happens all the time. And when Wildfire analyzes those executables and those processes, and the fact that traps is running in production on the endpoint really makes me feel confident that our security posture is at a next level. Any other questions?
You do. All right.
How do you overcome the perceived need to scan everything, which could be a roadblock in adopting a technology like this?
Yes. So interesting. We actually had a discussion about PCI compliance needing a scanner. And actually, if you go to their website, they actually are PCI compliant. The scanner is Wildfire. Think of it that way, right? It's actually getting scanned not only with traditional antivirus, but it's actually getting scanned dynamic, static, machine learning with the Wildfire engine, right? So another thing to think about here with the whole scanning thought process, last year in Las Vegas, I don't know the guy's name, he presented today. He's a researcher for Palo Alto Networks, and what he did really just sealed the deal for me. He, in front of the entire crowd, grabbed a docx file. He grabbed a software package he bought on the dark web. He checked a couple boxes, dragged and dropped the docx into that little tool, and created a new iteration of ransomware. Brand new file, new hash, never before seen. He uploaded it to a VirusTotal-like service on the dark web, and it generated the hash, and it checked it against every known antivirus product under the sun. Symantec, McAfee, Malwarebytes, all of it. Green, 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 green for every single one of those. What does that mean? That means if that file ended up on your user's desktop and you're running the latest version of, Antivirus X, even if you scanned it, it would come back green. So then he executed it, destroyed the machine. He did it with traps, showed the multi-layer approach to the exploits, as well as the malware prevention logic with Wildfire, and it stopped it. So that really sealed the deal for me. I'm like, okay, so if I had Malwarebytes and I scanned it and said, okay, user, your machine's fine, and handed it back to them, and then they double-clicked on it, then they're going to get their machine compromised. So the whole scanning mindset, you kind of just have to forget about that. That's a thing of the past. Scanning your machine is an old technology. If they ever did introduce a scanning feature, which maybe, I don't know, if they did, I would suspect that it would just check it against Wildfire, which is 1,000,000 times better than the traditional, okay, I got my 50 meg signature update. So it's a different way of thinking. A lot of the old timers, the guys who have been doing this for a long time, love the scan button, but the current world, it doesn't work. It's not as simple anymore. You really have to have something on the endpoint, such as traps, to actually analyze processes and executables running, and actually have it constantly get smarter. The other thing you'll see is people say, oh, it's a very low footprint on the machine. It really is. I mean, when you launch it on there, it's running, it's watching protected processes, and any executable run checks against Wildfire. That's all it does. It's not making the machine slow. It's not constantly needing updates from a signature update. So it's just really great. It really does provide low CPU and RAM for your standard machine. So, any other questions at all?
Can you touch a little bit more on the heartbeat and what you found with how many units you're putting on a single ESM server?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend distributing that out. We had so many machines checking in every 5 minutes that essentially you would just click refresh and just see like so many checking in. And it was causing issues, so what we ended up doing is just dialing it back a bit. But if you have a very large distributed system, you can have multiple servers. It's something we haven't done yet, but I would assume in the future we'd probably do that. But it's definitely a possibility. You could have multiple servers regionally, all checking in. And the heartbeat is just, hey, do you have any updates for me? If anything occurs on the machine, it reaches out to the server to check the hash and stuff. So it's just one of those things that as we got more and more checking in, it's something we had to adjust. Another thing I will give Palo Alto Networks props for is their support is really good. If you call trap support and have a problem, they're very, very helpful. They'll dump the forensics. They'll actually look at what's happening. And actually, we got into a content update because we were having some strange problem, and they actually corrected it for us. So, those guys are really helpful. They answer the phone, and they really know what they're doing. So, any other questions at all? I know you guys are deploying this, and there's a lot of questions that I had when I was doing it. And to be honest, I'm very, very confident in the product. It's definitely it's made us successful.
When you were referring to the endpoint security on each one, what's the recommendation per server of how many endpoint nodes that would connect back to that and talk to that as a maximum? Are we talking like 1,000 nodes, 2,000 nodes?
I think it's a large number, to be honest. Very, very large number. 30,000.
Yeah.
So
Ron, our resident PM in the room, wants to tell everybody it's 30,000.
Yeah, it's really not that much bandwidth either.
Here you go, buddy.
Hey everyone. So with 4.1, we just up the number of supported devices to 150,000 with the heartbeat of 1 hour, right? So with the standard
Yeah.
heartbeat, if you get it down to 5, right? So if you have custom question, get to support, they will help you. So it can scale up, can have multiple ESM. If you have more complex environment, you want to have heartbeat more frequent, call support, they will help you with the configuration. But
Yeah.
it's really scalable.
Apologies, I forgot we just released 401 Wednesday?
And please upgrade for one. There are some very important features like the child process.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the
We're
child
going to be upgrading to
processes,
4
yeah.
when I get back.
It's an update that gives you out of the box policies, and
Yep.
it's really, really important.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys all have different hats as well. You guys do different things. It's really great after you push this out to your entire company and it's all running and you can move on because it just does its job. And to be completely honest with you, knock on wood, we haven't had any problems at all. No ransomware, no, I can't tell you any tickets at all with a compromised host. Brutally honest, 0. It's really doing its job. And I haven't had a single issue with performance as well. No one's calling and saying, hey, my machine runs slow, not this new antivirus. Because no one understands, like every time you'll get a ticket in, they have this old thought process and you kind of have to coach the users as well as your IT staff on this is a different approach to protecting the endpoint.
Any other questions? Okay.
So in my environment, I have a lab network that's semi-air-gapped. It used to be air-gapped, but less air-gapped nowadays. And I'm thinking about also not just deploying for the office side, but also the lab side. Do you guys actually have any kind of like a air-gapped or closed-off area? How do you get the communication to Wildfire going?
Wildfire, you'd have to have an internet connection from your server to get to Wildfire. The nice part about Palo Alto is you could have your zones. You could get very granular with this server can only get to the Wildfire URL, and it's just SSL traffic. So it does need internet access, though, to get to the Wildfire cloud.
Is it possible to have a second server sitting on the lab network talking to the first server? I'm not sure how licensing or anything would work out. Where
We can collect later.
Yeah, there in the admin guide, there's different ways of deploying traps. I showed you the way that we did it, but you could have multiple servers. So, and as far as AirGap goes, like you could literally something I didn't cover is in your policies you can get very specific to a user or a host. So you could say, hey, this policy only applies to this host. Hey, this policy only applies to this user, and it's integrated with Active Directory. So all your groups. Everything's already there, so it's really great. If you wanted to create a new group in AD and use that as a reference on your ESM server, you can do that. So if you wanted a different policy for your servers, a different policy for the endpoints, different policies for your XP machines, if you still have those. It also runs on 2003 server, so if you have to have that, some people do. Some people have old software that won't run on anything else. You can install Traps endpoint protection on 2003 servers. So, any other questions at all?
How often are you seeing exploits as opposed to a traditional exe-based malware being blocked on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I see a lot of the Wildfire stuff. Anytime it's the exploit prevention stuff, it's very interesting. You'll see explore.exe, DLL. It's very, very complicated. Like, I'm not a developer at all. There's a lot of techniques that they use to get into the machine, and Traps sees it if it's a protected process and kills it off. So I typically see more of the Wildfire stuff. But what's nice is you can turn on quarantine and it removes it from the machine. So it's a really great feature that they added in there. I think there was a question back there too.
Yep.
I'm kind of curious on your policy overhead. With us, we have issues with our software devs where they have unsigned applications.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you guys handle that.
You just do groups. I mean, if you really wanted to exclude that group of machines from your standard policies, create a new group, include. So, like an example is, we had software that was signed, but it's very sensitive, very, very sensitive. The vendor that created this software actually recommends not having endpoint protection on the server it's running on. So we're scratching our heads like, we're not going to be compliant with our own policy if we're not putting this on there. You can actually exclude certain parts of traps on only a single host. So, you know, let's say one exploit prevention technique is rustling around with the process. You could actually just take that one little piece away and everything else is still there. So you still have your protection. You can get really granular. And what's really great is it's Active Directory integration. So I'm sure you guys all have an AD environment at your company. You just create a group, drag and drop, and you're good to go. It syncs. So. Any other questions at all? I really appreciate you guys coming out and listening to me talk about this because it's just exciting, it's fun. I love this stuff. If you guys have any questions after the presentation, I'll be around. I'll be at the party tonight.
Well, thank you, Luke. We appreciate
thank you.
it. Thank you much.